Hola a todos, and welcome to our very last session of the Nature for Life Hub. We have enjoyed taking this journey with you, and we are deeply impressed by the firm commitments made and the bold plans for action laid forth. The conversation does not stop here. In this vein, our last session looks to the future and speaks to protecting and empowering those who are defending our planets. Entitled Defending Our Future, Securing Future for Environmental Defenders and Our Planet. This is the last session of our event. We hope you enjoy.
I'm delighted and excited to welcome you all to this final event in which we will get to hear from some of the most cutting edge and expert voices in any debate on sustainability. We will hear from those living on the front line of the climate crisis and who, as well as inheriting a rich expertise of the natural world, are having to constantly evolve and apply that knowledge as their communities and their forests come under threat. Arguably, there is nobody on the planet with a greater stake in its future than Indigenous youth leaders, like those who we'll hear from shortly. At Global Witness, I'm honoured to work alongside these leaders and indeed many other land and environmental defenders, some of whom work for NGOs or other organisations, but more of which are often just community members who have seen their land snatched by paramilitary groups or their rivers contaminated by extractive industries, and have decided to take a stand. Land and environmental defenders are the eyes and the ears on the ground who see the impacts of corrupt governance and irresponsible business, and they're the voices of change. They should surely be consulted at the centre of any discussion about how to uphold rights and protect the planet. But too often, quite the opposite is occurring. At Global Witness, we've shown that at least 4 land and environmental defenders have been murdered every week since the Paris Climate Agreement was signed, just for standing up for their rights and our planet. Last year was the deadliest year on record, with at least 212 activists killed. Colombia saw a huge surge in attacks, and together with the Philippines, made up more than half of the killings. Brazil, Honduras, and Nicaragua have consistently figured among the worst hit countries. Indigenous and local peoples protect 80% of the world's biodiversity, yet they're disproportionately affected by this violence. Last year, 40% of those killed belonged to Indigenous communities, even though they make up just 5% of the world's population. Many of these killings are driven by irresponsible business projects carried out without the necessary safeguards. Almost a quarter of those murdered last year had protested mining projects. 34 people were killed for speaking out about large-scale agricultural projects. However, it is important to underline that our statistics undoubtedly represent only the tip of the iceberg for 2 reasons. Firstly, our data on killings is likely to be an underestimate, given that many murders go unreported, and in many countries there simply isn't the civic space or the freedom of expression to get the news out to organisations like ours. And secondly, the killings represent only the sharpest end of the threats. Globally, a range of tactics are used to silence defenders, including death threats against them, against their children, smear campaigns, surveillance, and imprisonment. Women defenders often face gender-specific threats. We need land and environmental defenders' wisdom, but right now they need our solidarity. So my question is this: how can we hope to protect the planet if we can't protect those who defend it? I'll come back to that question in a moment, but not before hearing from 4 inspirational Indigenous leaders. Firstly, Walela Sai is an activist of the Paita Suri people in Brazil. She's a councillor and a member of the Ethnic Environmental Association of Candide Defense. She is also a councillor of the State Council for the Rights of Children and Youth. We'll watch a short video shot by her colleagues and then hear from Walela herself.
Meu nome é Walela Roitiai, sou indígena do povo Paité Suruí de Rondônia. E hoje eu venho aqui falar sobre um assunto muito sério que vem acontecendo com os povos indígenas do Brasil. Nós estamos sendo criminalizados e violentados constantemente, pois nós, povos indígenas, somos quem estão defendendo a floresta e a vida que há nela. Sofremos violências e violações diariamente. E um desses exemplos é exatamente o caso do jovem indígena e líder Ari Urueuauau, que foi assassinado em abril deste ano, já durante a pandemia do coronavírus. E a questão que fica é: quem matou Ari e por que mataram Ari? Ari era jovem e fazia parte do grupo de monitoramento da sua terra. E nós sabemos que o seu assassinato está ligado exatamente com o fato de Ari proteger a sua terra e lutar pelos seus direitos. Mas até hoje e até agora, nós não temos respostas sobre o caso de Ari, ou porque Ari foi morto, ou quem mandou matar Ari. Então nós perguntamos: o que aconteceu? Por que nós não temos respostas sobre o caso do Ari? Por que os povos indígenas continuam perdendo seus líderes para essas violências? Por que continuamos sofrendo constantes violações dos nossos direitos? Direitos esses que estão contidos na Constituição do Brasil, que deveriam ser respeitados, mas não são. Então, é uma situação muito séria e muito crítica, onde os povos indígenas do Brasil pedem ajuda, porque somos nós que estamos protegendo a floresta. Somos nós que protegemos a vida que há nela, porque acreditamos não apenas que a floresta é a nossa casa, mas acreditamos que nós somos a floresta e estamos protegendo a vida que está nela e protegendo ela para todos que estão no mundo, porque a floresta em pé, ela não beneficia apenas os povos indígenas que estão nela, mas todos que vivem no planeta, porque nós precisamos entender que o planeta é a nossa casa e que nós devemos cuidar delas. E é isso que nós, povos indígenas, estamos fazendo. Mas nós não podemos fazer isso se nós continuarmos morrendo. Nós não podemos proteger a nossa casa e cuidar da floresta se nós não estivermos vivos. Então, eu peço explicações, é um grito de socorro dos povos indígenas, né, pelas nossas vidas, que vêm sendo constantemente ameaçadas. Os povos indígenas do Brasil e de todos os lugares estão sofrendo. O mundo está sofrendo por causa disso também, porque a floresta também está sofrendo. Então, parem de matar os povos indígenas, parem de matar a floresta, né? Vamos cuidar dela e cuidar do nosso mundo. E, por final, eu peço, e em nome de todos, que respeitem os nossos direitos, que respeitem as nossas vidas. Exijo que esses direitos sejam cumpridos e denuncio aqui o que vem acontecendo nas florestas, nas terras indígenas e com a vida dos povos indígenas que aqui vivem. Exijo que algo seja feito.
Thank you very much, Walela, for sharing your story and for that clear call to action. I believe that next up we'll see a video shot by members of the Emberá Querá community of the Emberá Nation in Panama, and that we'll then hear from one of their members, Melitza Flaco, who's a traditional dance teacher for young women and participates in the town's tourism project as a way of preserving culture and traditions through sustainable business practices. Since 2016, she's also president of the Emberá and Waunan Youth Organization of Panama.
Ane masih sebab-sebab dah kain. Ada bolso ada apa ni?
El video nos muestra un ejemplo de nuestra fragilidad ante los traumas sociales que nos rodean y amenazan nuestra integridad y existencia. Pueden ser ganaderos o agricultores invadiendo nuestros territorios, empresas mineras en busca de nuestros tesoros ocultos bajo nuestros pies, riesgo de la guerrilla o el narcotráfico que nos alcanzan, migrantes escapando de zonas de conflicto u otros. Miren, Benana, Mora Tronjarabada, Melitza Flaco. Nuestros pueblos están siendo marcados por la incertidumbre. Nuestras tradiciones milenarias chocan contra una realidad en la cual el abandono de los gobiernos y la falta de asistencia para el desarrollo cierran nuestras posibilidades para vivir mejor y ser autosuficientes. Sin embargo, esta condición no nos desalienta. Buscamos en la educación el medio para superar nuestras capacidades y tener mejor calidad de vida. Los pueblos indígenas luchamos por proteger los bosques todos los días. Protegemos las fuentes de agua como recurso para subsistir. Es triste ver que en medio de toda esta pandemia muchas familias están siendo despojadas de sus comunidades sin saber a dónde ir. Nuestros líderes están siendo asesinados y nuestros bosques están siendo acabados, pero nosotros seguiremos peleando para seguir manteniendo los bosques llenos de biodiversidad, los ríos vivos y animales sanos, en testimonio real de nuestra tradición de conservar la naturaleza. La presión social amenaza nuestra identidad. Los gobiernos no nos incluyen en sus políticas públicas y toma de decisiones, mucho menos en programas de desarrollo con recursos suficientes. Pero aquí estamos, haciendo frente a las adversidades para decirle al mundo que, cuando ustedes, con su modelo de desarrollo insostenible, amenacen el equilibrio ambiental global, acelerando el cambio climático, nosotros, los pueblos indígenas, en nuestra lucha callada y sostenida por siglos y milenios, seguimos viviendo en armonía con la naturaleza y somos el ejemplo de cultura ecológica vivientes. Nosotros, la juventud indígena de Mesoamérica, consciente de los valores de nuestra identidad cultural, orgullosos de nuestros orígenes y preocupados por la degradación ambiental que se ha provocado en nuestro planeta, insistimos en que toda la humanidad es socialmente responsable de estos cambios que nos amenazan y debemos redoblar los esfuerzos ante la posibilidad de la extinción total de toda especie viva en la Tierra. Aprovechemos la tecnología avanzada y vigilemos con drones la biodiversidad que guarda nuestros bosques. Apoyen nuestros esfuerzos, copien parte de nuestra forma de vida y sabiduría milenaria. Fuimos, somos y seremos los guardianes del bosque y seguiremos positivo, haciendo nuestro mayor esfuerzo para proteger la madre tierra.
Thank you, Milit. Inspirational words there, and just to hear about the range of threats that the defenders are facing, but also how the technology is being used to advance their struggle in spite of that constant threat that they're under. We'll now go to Ecuador and to Jomar Wickler Minas Inuma. He's a Peruvian Shipibio leader born in the native community of Panaillo of Ucayali region in the Amazon. He's a youth representative of Coica. So we're going to watch his video and then hear some words from him.
Ya no somos esos indígenas que nos dejábamos a humillar de un gobierno.
Buenas tardes a todos los participantes que en esta oportunidad están participando en este gran evento sobre la defensa de los derechos del bosque, las soluciones basadas desde la ciencia para poder asegurar un futuro en el planeta. Mi nombre es Jomar Wickler Minas Inuma, del pueblo Shipibo. En esta oportunidad represento a la coordinadora de las organizaciones indígenas de la cuenca amazónica Coica, al programa de juventudes que venimos siempre trabajando a favor de nuestra población amazónica de toda Latinoamérica, incluyendo nuestros 9 países quienes son bases. En este proceso, como jóvenes, hemos venido trabajando, fortaleciendo espacios de liderazgo, espacios oportunos para poder brindar herramientas tecnológicas para que aquellos jóvenes que están trabajando y defendiendo sus territorios tengan el conocimiento adecuado para poder seguir trabajando de acuerdo a la demarcación demográfica que tienen sus territorios a nivel de sus propios países. Arraigue común entre hermanos porque nosotros estamos incluidos como seres humanos a nivel mundial. Durante este proceso se ha pasado muchas cosas, como también la amenaza y la muerte de los grandes líderes. Un claro ejemplo es Perú, que hace poco han cumplido 5 defensores en un solo año. Así como ellos, también hay en otros países como Brasil, como Colombia, como Guyana Francesa, como Bolivia, que son miembros de la COICA, quienes están pasando no solo por amenazas, también están matando a sus líderes. No podemos permitir que en el transcurso de nuestras vidas sigamos matando y destruyendo bosques a aquellos que realmente sí defienden los bosques. ¿Por qué decimos que sí defienden los bosques? Porque son ellos los que viven ahí durante toda su vida. Y las personas que destruyen el bosque son las empresas transnacionales, las empresas que de una y otra forma ingresan a nuestras comunidades nativas para destruir nuestros bosques, para implantar su forma de vida diferente a nuestros pueblos indígenas, dejando al lado nuestras propias realidades. Por ello, desde aquí, nosotros como jóvenes indígenas de COICA, seguimos pidiendo a todo el mundo que sigamos uniendo estas energías para poder construir esta defensa, no solo desde un conocimiento ancestral, sino también un pedido de que nosotros sigamos formando más líderes, sigamos construyendo alianzas estratégicas para poder brindar la seguridad territorial en nuestras comunidades nativas a los pueblos indígenas de Latinoamérica, del Perú y el mundo y todos nuestros 9 países que aglomeran esta coordinadora. Nosotros, desde esta posición, como jóvenes, estamos incluidos en confianza y mucha unidad con nuestros grandes líderes, representantes nacionales y especialmente desde la coordinadora y toda esta alianza global que tenemos de esta lucha de seguir trabajando frente al cambio climático. Incentivamos a que más jóvenes en el mundo sigan estos ejemplos claros de nuestros líderes que en algún momento están siendo asesinados. Que ya basta de seguir marginando nuestros derechos, nuestros principios rectores como jóvenes, como ciudadanos que somos, a nuestra futura generación, ir dándole un espacio en el mundo para que ellos en el futuro puedan crecer y conocer nuestras biodiversidades y ellos puedan ir y también dar a sus generaciones que vienen detrás de nosotros. El trabajo no es solo para nosotros, el trabajo va a trascender para nuestra generación y otras generaciones que se van a sentir agradecidos de que nosotros, como cuidadores de este espacio en el que estamos habitando, pueda seguir existiendo muchos años más de vida. Muchas gracias y mucha fuerza a todos nuestros hermanos de todos los países, especialmente a los amigos de Latinoamérica.
Thank you very much, Jomar. Finally, we'll hear from Kalfen Wusan, an indigenous Minahasa youth from Wuuk, Sulawesi Utara in Indonesia. He's a member of the youth wing of the Indonesian Alliance of Indigenous Peoples, AMAN. Kalfen's actively involved in the smartphone movement, a cultural movement that focuses on the use of smartphones to document the activities of indigenous youth, communities, and territories. We'll watch an example of this work before hearing from Kalfen himself.
Kenapa Pak yang dipaksa-paksa kayak gini Pak? Apa masalahnya? Pak!
Tabea, masyarakat adat adalah pemegang kunci masa depan bumi. Masyarakat adat menjaga hutannya, wilayah adatnya sudah secara turun-temurun tanpa menyebabkan kerusakan apapun. Hal ini karena leluhur masyarakat adat telah mewariskan pengetahuan yang paling adil, bertanggung jawab dan berkelanjutan dalam menjaga dan mengelola seluruh haknya atas wilayah adatnya, atas sumber daya yang dimiliki, atas ruang hidupnya, atas nasib masa depannya, dan masa depan bumi. Pemuda adat selaku generasi penerus masyarakat adat juga menjadi garda terdepan dalam penyelamatan bumi. Sayangnya, negara, korporasi terus-menerus mendatangi wilayah adat dan menghancurkannya. Ketika masyarakat adat melawan, mereka malah dikriminalisasi. Seperti baru-baru ini, ada Effendi Buhing, Ketua Komunitas Adat Laman Kinipan, Kalimantan Tengah, juga masyarakat adat Besipai di Nusa Tenggara Timur, dan lain-lain. Bahkan di Kalteng sendiri, pemuda adat Laman Kinipan yaitu Rizwan, turut pula ditahan hanya karena berjuang di wilayah adatnya. Sama seperti kami, Rizwan adalah generasi penerus masyarakat adat yang tengah berjuang memulihkan kampungnya, memulihkan salah satu hutan terakhir Kalimantan, dan memulihkan bumi. Dalam beberapa bulan terakhir ini, kita masyarakat adat di seluruh dunia baru memperingati beberapa momen penting. Tanggal 9 Agustus, kita merayakan Hari Internasional Masyarakat Adat Sedunia. Tanggal 13 September, kita memperingati 13 tahun Deklarasi Perserikatan Bangsa-Bangsa tentang hak-hak masyarakat adat. Namun ternyata momentum seperti ini tidak menggugah kesadaran pemerintah untuk lebih memperhatikan masyarakat adat. Selama ini masih banyak masyarakat adat yang menjadi korban. Wilayah adatnya dirampas, hak-haknya tidak diperhatikan, bahkan eksistensinya pun sebagai masyarakat adat seolah tidak diakui. Padahal masyarakat adat adalah penjaga hutan, penjaga laut, penjaga gunung, penjaga bumi, dan semua fungsi untuk menjaga kehidupan ada pada mereka. Masyarakat adat adalah juga penjaga kebijaksanaan. Semua pengetahuan tersebut dipelihara oleh mereka. Upaya mereka menjaga keharmonisan alam semesta terlihat dari semua aktivitas mereka. Menyatu dengan alam, berhubungan dengan sesama manusia, berhubungan dengan leluhur, dan berhubungan dengan Sang Pencipta merupakan kebijaksanaan penting yang mereka ajarkan. Mereka juga mengajarkan kita bahwa universe is university. Alam semesta adalah sekolah tempat belajar, sumber pengetahuan, sekaligus sumber kehidupan. Oleh karena itu, masyarakat adat menjaganya dengan nyawa mereka. Sebab bagi mereka, hutan, tanah, air, dan segala sesuatu yang ada di wilayah adat bukan hanya milik mereka. Semuanya itu bukan hanya warisan leluhur, tapi semuanya itu mereka pinjam dari generasi berikutnya. Sehingga kita perlu memberi dukungan kepada seluruh masyarakat adat. Di Indonesia sendiri, masyarakat adat bersama Aliansi Masyarakat Adat Nusantara atau AMAN terus berjuang di tengah pandemi. Masyarakat adat di Nusantara menunjukkan resiliensi terhadap krisis pangan. Pandemi ini juga menjadi momen bagi dunia untuk melihat dan belajar dari masyarakat adat. Bagaimana survive di tengah pandemi. Para pemuda adat terus bergerak dan berjuang. Lewat gerakan pulang kampung, mereka memulihkan jati diri, menjaga masa depan, dan menjaga bumi. Mereka adalah pejuang nasib planet ini dari penghancuran dan kehancuran. Mereka adalah pemilik masa depan masyarakat adat. Masyarakat adat di Nusantara juga terus mendesak pemerintah untuk mengakui dan memberikan perlindungan kepada mereka. Hal ini mewujud pada upaya mereka dengan terus mendesak pemerintah untuk segera mengesahkan rancangan undang-undang masyarakat adat. Negara berkewajiban mengakui hak-hak masyarakat adat. Sains sudah membuktikan dan memperlihatkan bagaimana masyarakat adat terbukti bekerja menyelamatkan nasib umat manusia. Sehingga negara harus hadir, membela masyarakat adat, bukan malah mengkriminalisasi. Dengan demikian, mari kita bersama memberikan dukungan kepada masyarakat adat di Nusantara, kepada AMAN, dan seluruh elemen masyarakat yang berjuang demi masyarakat adat. Mari juga kita ikut bergabung dengan perjuangan masyarakat adat di seluruh dunia, demi satu-satunya rumah bersama yang kita sebut bumi. Iya ya Tusanti.
Thank you, Kalfain. And I think as an international organization that works with activists around the world, what we've just heard from the participants tonight is emblematic of the struggles of land and environmental defenders all around the world, whether it's Walela talking about the frustration about the lack of justice for the killing of her colleague, Milica talking about the wide range of armed and other groups that they have to stand up against, Jomar talking about the role of business, including transnational companies, and then Kalfane's video showing the brutal criminalization that people can face simply for defending their land and stop it being grabbed for large agribusiness plantations. But I'm sure that you're as inspired as I am by the determination of those young Indigenous leaders to continue defending their forests as their ancestors did, but harnessing science and technology, local and international networks to really halt the climate crisis and protect the planet for future generations. So I'd close by returning to my question from earlier about how can we hope to protect the planet if we can't protect those who defend it? And the answer is that a radical change is required. If governments are serious about climate change, serious about democracy, even just serious about sustainable development and business that benefits everybody, rather than just the corrupt few, then they must support and protect those defenders facing threats and guarantee justice when attacks occur. Impunity at the moment acts as a green light for anybody who is seeking to violently stifle dissent. And governments must also put in place robust and enforceable legislation to ensure that all businesses, at home and abroad, prevent any adverse human rights and environmental impacts in their supply chains, through mandatory due diligence and guaranteed accountability. And we've seen recent commitments to do just this at the European Union level. These are as necessary as they are welcome. Because land and environmental defenders face specific and heightened risks precisely because they're often taking on vested financial interests. So companies and investors have to take their responsibility seriously too, implementing effective risk assessments, due diligence, and early warning mechanisms. There's an increasing body of businesses that are working towards just this. Others must make sure they're not left behind. Finally, the UN environmental, human rights, and development agencies have always been a crucial support for defenders at risk. We need their voice advocating for state and business responses. We need them to hold the powerful to account through, for example, implementation of UNEP's policy on environmental defenders. In short, we need you. Land and environmental defenders need you. We need you to raise your voice, to speak out, and to stand in solidarity with those on the front lines of the battle for our planet's future. I'll now hand over to Andrew Revkin, Founding Director of the Initiative on Communication and Sustainability at Columbia University's Earth Institute.
Thanks, Ben, and thanks to all the presenters before and for this series of days. It's a very powerful moment of consolidated conversation around a critical issue. The pressures on forest regions and basically resource frontiers around the world have never been higher. My journey in this arena started more than 30 years ago in the Amazon rainforest as a reporter, and the story keeps building. It's an honor to be part of this day, and right now we're going to talk about the science that shows convincingly that conservation capacity of indigenous and other local communities focused on sustaining the resources around them is powerfully clear. It's in the data. It's not just a romanticized vision. So I hope you'll listen to the two scientists who'll be with me in a minute. We're also going to hear from another indigenous leader. I have to say, preface things by saying I come from the Hudson Valley here. I've been living in these hills, billion-year-old hills, scoured by time for 25 years or so. I honor and respect here the Munsee Lenape peoples who took care of this landscape for thousands of years before colonization. And it's something that I just try to keep track of day to day as I walk and commerce and live in these regions. As the developed world's resource thirst has intensified, pressures on communities tending last bastions of biodiversity have intensified as well. The statistics that Ben laid out are so deeply sobering. The testimonials you just heard from Walela and the other indigenous leaders are powerful calls for support. And I want to just add one more little reflection from back 30 years ago. Osmarino Mancio Rodriguez, a rubber tapper who was a colleague of Chico Mendez, whose biography I wrote in 1990, said something very simple that resonates today. At first, the people talking about ecology were only defending the fishes, the animals, the forest, and the river. They didn't realize that human beings were in the forest, and that these humans were the real ecologists, because they couldn't live without the forest, and the forest couldn't be saved without them. That was 30 years ago, in writing about the burning season back then, and here we are again. So we're going to look at the data now through the eyes of two wonderful scientists. You'll hear from them in a minute, Pam McElwee and Catherine Baragwanath. But first, we're going to hear one more voice from the forest. This is of Tuntiak Katan, a leader of the Shuar people who managed 2 million hectares of tropical rainforests in the southern Amazon region of Ecuador. He's the general coordinator of the Global Alliance of Territorial Communities.
Un saludo a todos los hermanos y hermanas, pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales del mundo, así también a toda la sociedad, a niños, mujeres, hombres, académicos, científicos, gobernantes del mundo. Un saludo ferviente desde la Amazonía ecuatoriana. En esta ocasión quiero referirme sobre los conocimientos y prácticas de los pueblos indígenas del mundo. Los últimos remanentes de bosques, de territorios, de agua dulce en el mundo, se puede ver en los territorios de comunidades indígenas, en la Amazonía, en Mesoamérica, en Indonesia, en África. Pero cabe señalar que esta existencia de los recursos, de los bosques, es por los conocimientos y las prácticas de los pueblos indígenas y de las comunidades locales. No es por las políticas públicas de los gobiernos, de los gobernantes. Más bien es por la lucha histórica, por la resistencia de los pueblos indígenas para preservar estos territorios. Y en estos territorios existe biodiversidad, y esos territorios contienen bosques y ayudan a combatir el cambio climático. Por lo tanto, estas ciencias, los conocimientos, tienen que ser respetados, valorados y reconocidos por los científicos, por los gobernantes y toda la humanidad entera. Y garantizar esos territorios, esos conocimientos, para que sean el apoyo principal para el combate del cambio climático global y la preservación de la biodiversidad.
Sorry, I'm joking. So Pam McElwee is an associate professor of human ecology at the School of Environmental and Biological Sciences at Rutgers. More specifically, in context of today's conversation, she has that great interdisciplinary background as an environmental scientist with a joint PhD in anthropology and forestry. And she also has been an IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, author of the Special Report on Climate Change and Land Use. And as you'll hear now, she worked on the global assessment of the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. She'll be describing the findings in that report as they relate to this issue of frontier communities in harm's way and what we can do to help them. And joining her will be Catherine Baragwanath, a PhD candidate in political science department at the University of California, San Diego, whose expertise is on the particular regional and local politics around conservation and resources focused deeply in the Amazon basin, and on how political corruption and other issues play in, not just at the national scale, which we're all too familiar with in Brazil these days, but at the local scale. So I hope they can both be brought into the conversation now. Oh, great. How are you doing? Sorry about my coughing fit. The video ended sooner than I had planned.
No worries.
I was trying to drink some water. How are you both doing?
Very well. Those videos were incredibly powerful.
They are indeed.
Very strong statements.
And you both have had your experience deep in these communities and deep in these regions. You're not simply sitting there with models and data, right? I think it's important that people understand that. I wish that Tuntiak could be with us in the conversation, but as we know, he could only send a pre-recorded note. maybe we'll start with the IPBES, and you don't have to repeat the long name. It's basically a global assessment like we've done for climate of biodiversity conservation questions and options. So Pam, could you get at that a little bit for folks?
Absolutely. Yeah. So IPBES was basically modeled after the IPCC, and it was meant to do these regular assessments of the state of science around biodiversity and ecosystem services. And so I was part of the team that did the first global assessment for IPBES, which came out last year in May of 2019. And viewers may remember some of the headlines that came out of that, the idea that there's 1 million species at risk, that more than 70% of the world's terrestrial land surface has been altered by human activity. So there are a lot of very dramatic headlines in that report. But there were some specific headlines related to Indigenous peoples that I want to emphasize. The first one is that the global assessment made it very, very clear that Indigenous peoples have a very important role to play in the conservation of biodiversity and ecosystems. And we looked at the data, we looked at the science on this, we summarized studies from many, many different places. And what we concluded is that Indigenous peoples are absolutely essential for any conservation strategy going forward. Now, why is that? It's because they either use, manage, control, have rights to more than 25% of the terrestrial surface. So that's a very large chunk of land. And then within their lands tend to be ones of higher biodiversity, more intact ecosystems. And so they're doing a better job. They're doing a better job of all the things that we need to be doing globally to protect sources of biodiversity, to protect ecosystem health and ecosystem integrity. So there's a lot to be learned from Indigenous communities as to how they're doing it. But overall, they're doing a better job than outside of Indigenous territories. So to us, as scientists, that's something that we need to emphasize. So this is an important year. Next year will be an important year for global biodiversity. Countries of the world are coming together next year at a big biodiversity summit to determine our next targets and our next goals for biodiversity for the next 20 to 30 years. And Indigenous people have to be part of that conversation from a scientific point of view, from a human rights point of view, from any way you look at it. They need to be part of the conversation.
One quick question before we get to Catherine. I was looking in depth at IPBES and the Biological Conservation Treaty a couple of years ago, and it seems so hard to move from that global scale. Everyone sets these global goals, but what they don't realize is how hard those goals are not achievable unless you really zoom in on the particular context in particular places. I think that comes out in Pam, I'm sure, in your work. And certainly Catherine, this is a good segue to Catherine, because you're giving that granularity, right? You're there on the ground studying how things do or don't happen in particular contexts around particular places in the Amazon. So Catherine, if you can take the floor here and lay out your findings, that would be great. And then we can converse for a few minutes.
Yeah, thanks. So much like Pam was saying, the Amazon rainforest accounts to about half of the remaining tropical forests on our planet. And it's an important source of biodiversity. It also has major influence on the world's climate and water cycles. And as such, it's key to preservation efforts and to our fight against climate change. However, with forest fires and illegal logging and mining surging in recent years, the Amazon has seen unprecedented levels of deforestation. And preserving the Amazon has never been more important. So in our recent paper published in PNAS and co-authored with Ella Bai, we argue that Indigenous territories, when granted full property rights, are really very effective at curbing deforestation inside their lands. What we did was we used satellite data to test the effect of these property rights on deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon. And we're looking at data that spans from 1982 to 2016. And we find that inside Indigenous territories with full property rights, so those that are actually finishing the process of demarcation and are granted the full property rights, there's a significant decrease in deforestation. So our results suggest that not only do indigenous territories serve an important human rights role, but they're actually a cost-effective way for governments to preserve their forested areas.
Great. There we go. So when you think about some of the stories that we heard earlier, and just this general question of how to seriously, concretely integrate indigenous needs into conservation strategies, if this were a clock from 0 to 12 to get that done, where are we on that clock? Maybe Pam, if you could start on that.
We have a long way to go. I mean, I'm encouraged by the fact that so many leaders are speaking out and they're getting platforms like this so that folks are aware of all the challenges that they face. But it's hugely difficult. I mean, in addition to the leaders that we heard about today, a group that's been working that's called the Environmental Justice Atlas. They map environmental conflicts around the world, including those involving indigenous peoples, and they're on the rise. Right. So we're getting more attention to issues surrounding indigenous land rights and the way they're fighting for the ability to defend those lands. But they're under increasing pressure at the same time. And so a lot of these are mining interests, fossil fuel interests. We also have to acknowledge there's also sometimes conflicts with conservation interests and sustainability interests. Sometimes protected areas are demarcated by governments without the full consent and acceptance of indigenous populations. So we've got a myriad range of problems that indigenous territories and communities are dealing with. I'm encouraged in the sense that this is a super year for biodiversity. Next year will be as well. And that all of the meetings that are leading up to that, most of which have moved online now, indigenous peoples are participating. It's often difficult for them to do that in global and in environmental governance because they're not nation states, but they have been included in a lot of these meetings. And so their concerns are coming through. And I hope that the countries that are going to be signatories to those next goals really take their concerns seriously.
Well, and that gets to the broader issue of environmental justice everywhere, from the Bronx to the Amazon to Borneo, where how do you elevate voices based on impacts, not just based on power? Existing power structures will always minimize those. And even, these conversations right now are really important. But when it comes to local land debates or whatever, that's where the legal framework has to be there too. And not just the framework, but enforcement. Catherine, when you think about that, maybe give us a thumbnail sketch of what it's like in the part of the Amazon in Brazil that you had worked in the context of this issue.
Yeah, so basically what we see is that in order to get full property rights in Brazil, you have to go through a 4-step process called demarcation. This process consists of 4 steps, the first of which is an anthropological study to identify the physical boundaries of the territory. Then the second step is approval by FUNAI. The third step is approval by the Minister of Justice. And then the fourth and final step would be homologation, which is a presidential decree and registration in the National Land Registry. And so what our study finds is that actually it's once indigenous peoples get to this 4th step that the effects that we see on deforestation actually become significant. And basically, this is because once territories are homologated, there's no open right to contestation. No third parties can contest the existence of the land. The land becomes permanent possession of the indigenous peoples, and extractive activities carried out by external actors can only occur after consulting the communities and the National Congress. So basically, these land titles, the legal aspect of this is really important, and it really gives power to the people in order to manage their land. And I think, you were asking how we were doing, and it looks like we're going backwards in the current context in Brazil. So I think it's really important to highlight how significant these lands are for biodiversity and for environmental preservation, but also highlight the importance of these lands for the indigenous peoples that live in them.
One of the other potential complications, well, it's actually a real complication in some places, maybe this is for Pam, is when for indigenous communities to have their legal rights sometimes includes those rights making relationships with more industrialized farming or the like, renting land. And so you can end up with a situation, and actually in Brazil, there's been even agencies battling over which comes first, the human rights or the environmental conservation value. And I know there's no easy answer there, but what would a solution path look like if you wanted to kind of have, the fewest trade-offs of that kind?
Right. I mean, yeah, there's no doubt that if you ask indigenous communities to put all of the effort into conservation, that can be very expensive. It can be very difficult. And so there are these trade-offs that have to be made in terms of, do we develop certain aspects? Do we conserve other aspects? And these are decisions that have to be made by the communities themselves. I mean, the most important thing, and one that we have mostly enshrined in international obligations, is this idea of free, prior, and informed consent. So if anything is happening on indigenous territories, they need to be consenting to it. So that's a minimum condition, right? I mean, it's necessary, but not sufficient. That's not going to solve all the problems. But certainly, we don't want to have development companies coming in and not getting that consent. I mean, that's a recipe for conflict for sure. But at the same time, I'm more encouraged to think about the ways that partnerships can happen, co-management can happen, better ways of allowing different indigenous communities to make their own choices about how best to manage their lands. I mean, we derive a lot of global benefits from their conservation actions, but it's not fair to put the burden of global conservation on indigenous communities without support for them, whether it's financial support or legal support and so forth. And so it's always going to be a difficult balance in terms of that. There's no easy magic solution. I wish there were. But it really depends on making a system where indigenous communities have rights, they're able to enforce those rights, right? I mean, Catherine's work is so important in pointing out land tenure rights, but you also need rule of law, you need court systems, you need to be able to defend those rights as well. And that's what we need. We need a whole package of things that indigenous communities can hold on to and make those decisions themselves.
That's a good place to start to wrap. I wanted to just get a last quick thought from Catherine and maybe from you, just a sentence or two of if you turn the clock forward to 2030, when the Sustainable Development Goals are theoretically due, in this context, convey a little bit of an image of what you see in the areas that you've studied closest. Like, what would that look like? What does success look like? Maybe Catherine.
So I think it's very important to keep up the good work that Brazil was doing up until 2012 and kind of push it forward. You want to keep IBAMA and FUNAI funded. You want to keep these agencies that are responsible for the monitoring and enforcement. Like Pam was saying, you don't just need the land rights, you need the whole legal infrastructure and technological infrastructure around it that enables the conservation efforts to actually thrive. And so keeping those funded and moving the science forward in this sense is very important in order for these land rights to actually be effective, as we've seen that they were up until 2016. And hopefully all of the indigenous territories that are still awaiting homologation and that are still awaiting their demarcation process. I mean, some territories have been waiting more than 25 years, more than 30 years. We would hope that they receive their full property rights and are able to manage them themselves.
And Pam, can you build on that a little bit? Like, what does success
I'd
look like?
Yeah, I'd absolutely.
Or at least the pathway to success.
Oh boy, if I knew that. Then. I mean, I would really like to see more discussion of the role of indigenous peoples and local community in goal and target setting. So there's a lot of discussion around the need to protect and conserve 30% of the earth. Some people say as much as half of the earth. And too often people get left out of that equation. And so I want there to be a strong recognition that those sorts of targets and goals need to be set by Indigenous communities themselves. They need to be at the table, and they need to be talking about their role in these long-term targets and goals rather than having them imposed upon them. And what they would, in many cases, say is that too often these, ideas of, we need X amount of area of protected areas, we need X percentage and so forth, are often based on biological criteria and not on social criteria, not on recognizing that people are part of environments as well. So I'd like to see more recognition of that as well.
That's such a great concept, the architecture of the transition, not just how many species and the like. This is a great, to me, it's always the beginning of a conversation. On my Columbia Sustain What webcast, we can continue this, carry forward and keep checking back to see how we're doing. Thanks so much, Pam and Catherine from Rutgers and UC San Diego for being part of this. And now I have the pleasure and the honor of turning things over for the closing half hour to Una Chaplin, who you likely know best through her work for years as an actor in projects ranging from Game of Thrones to the upcoming Avatar sequels. It's incredibly exciting to think what's coming there in that great series, which really got dug in on this idea of Indigenous guardianship in a huge way, huge physically. She has devoted more than the last 7 years to cultural exchange with Indigenous communities from all over the world, particularly Brazil, Mexico, and Chile, where part of her ancestry is with the Mapuche indigenous community of the present-day South Central Chile and Southwestern Argentina. She works through the boafoundation.org and aniwa.co, aniwa.co. And I just have to say, it's great to meet you in passing here, and good luck with the closing session with all your work, Una.
Thank you so much, Andrew. I really appreciate it. And wow, it's been really interesting to listen to these conversations. So thank you so much. Yeah, my name is Una Chaplin, and I just want to begin by saying thank you to the great mystery, to this great, absurd, wonderful, very, very mysterious day that we get to be living here on this earth, and giving thanks also to all the living beings in all places for contributing to this miracle. And, extend my thanks also to the caretakers of this world, to the people that look after our garden. And thank you also to If Not Us Then Who for always asking this amazingly important question. And thank you all as well for taking the time to hear these messages. And I really hope that you do hear these messages. So as Andrew said, I'm trustee of BOA Foundation. I also work with aniwa.co, and we are two organizations, sister organizations, a nonprofit and an events company that collaborate with Indigenous leaders from all over the world to participate in the conscious transformation of the planet, in kind of linking the far past all the way back to the beginning of time and this future that lies before us. And in my 7 years of collaboration and of deep study with Indigenous elders, I gotta say I've completely transformed my perspective on the whole of life. And I've tried to kind of bring words to both extend my gratitude, which is impossible because there's just too much, and also to try and explain and kind of communicate how these things that I've been learning have affected me and what it is that I've really been learning, but it's just something that can't really be spoken. And the best that I can kind of do is to say that I guess I've been learning to dance, in this incredibly complex and beautiful dance between sovereignty and relationship. And that is what the leaders that we work with have really showed me. And this dance led me to walk the streets of New York with the leaders that you'll be hearing shortly. And it was such a joy. It was so inspiring. They are tirelessly working for the freedom of their land and their people and the thriving of all of life on this planet. And they represent the guardians of 400 million hectares of tropical forests around the world. They advocate for the respect of territorial rights and the inclusion of their demands in global negotiations on forest and environmental issues. So their alliance is made up of 4 territorial organizations Aliansi Masyarakat Adat Nusantara. It's a beautiful language. It's short. In short, it's AMAN. The Mesoamerican Alliance of People and Forests, the AMPB, the Articulation of Indigenous Peoples of Brazil, APIB, and the coordinator of indigenous organizations of the Amazon Basin, COICA. And I would like to just introduce this little video so that they can give you a little more about what they're about. So the first guardian that I would like to introduce is Ruka Sambalini, who is from Indonesia. And I remember this woman's laugh, and this woman's laugh is the laugh of somebody who has purpose in her life, and she has such huge responsibility. But here we go. We're going to hear more from her.
Mana Sumuraka. Salam Nusantara dari Aman. Saat ini masyarakat adat di Indonesia terus menghadapi represi. Di tengah-tengah perjuangan kami untuk menyelamatkan diri dari pandemi COVID-19, saat ini pemerintah, DPR, dan perusahaan terus memperkuat tekanan terhadap kami. Kriminalisasi masyarakat adat meningkat, penggusuran terus terjadi, dan banyak sekali saudara-saudara kami yang lain, buruh yang dipecat semena-mena, petani yang juga terus berkonflik, dan perempuan, kaum miskin kota, penggerak lingkungan juga terus menghadapi tekanan. Masyarakat adat di Indonesia terbukti bahwa kami menjaga bumi, kami menjaga kemanusiaan. Selama pandemi ini terjadi, perusahaan, pemerintah tidak mampu menangani situasi. Banyak sekali saudara-saudara kami yang kelaparan, terancam krisis pangan. Yang terjadi adalah kami yang bergerak untuk menolong diri sendiri. Ini membuktikan bahwa bukan Monsanto yang memberi makan kami, tapi kami yang memberi makan diri sendiri. Di mana-mana, masyarakat adat yang tanahnya sudah hilang juga mengalami persoalan besar. Saat ini, masyarakat adat yang sudah kehilangan tanah dirampas oleh perusahaan adalah merupakan kelompok yang paling terancam karena krisis ini. Krisis ini juga menunjukkan bahwa sistem dan struktur ekonomi dunia saat ini sudah tidak mungkin lagi kita lanjutkan. Kita harus mulai membangun sistem ekonomi berdasarkan sistem lokal yang kecil-kecil yang dilandasi dengan semangat kebersamaan, solidaritas, dan gotong royong. Di tengah pandemi ini, dengan ketiadaan undang-undang masyarakat adat, tekanan yang bertubi-tubi kepada kami, masyarakat adat, pemerintah dan DPR sedang mengejar waktu mengesahkan Undang-Undang Omnibus Law Cipta Kerja. Undang-undang ini adalah ancaman yang luar biasa, ancaman yang sangat serius bagi kami masyarakat adat. Karena tanpa undang-undang ini saja sudah banyak sekali wilayah-wilayah adat kami yang dirampas. Dan dengan Omnibus Law ini, perusahaan dibantu oleh pemerintah dan aparat akan dengan mudah merampas wilayah adat yang masih tersisa. Undang-undang ini mengatakan bahwa akan menciptakan lapangan kerja, tapi sesungguhnya ini adalah neraka bagi masyarakat adat. Pekerjaan-pekerjaan tradisional masyarakat adat yang sudah kami praktekkan sebagai sumber penghidupan kami sejak leluhur kami saat ini sedang terancam. Anak-anak muda yang sudah pulang ke kampung menjaga dan memelihara wilayah adat. Perempuan-perempuan adat yang selalu merawat wilayah adat sedang terancam. Saya meminta seluruh konsumen untuk berhenti mengkonsumsi produk berbahan sawit dan berbahan tebu dari Indonesia. Saya juga meminta untuk berhenti menggunakan hasil-hasil tambang dari Indonesia. Karena semua itu harganya adalah darah kami dan punahnya masa depan kami. Saya juga menghimbau kepada pengambil kebijakan untuk berhenti mendukung solusi-solusi palsu terhadap perubahan iklim dan krisis kita saat ini. Ini saatnya untuk menggalakkan dukungan kepada masyarakat adat dan komunitas lokal. Karena yang menjaga bumi ini adalah kami. Jika Anda melakukan ini, maka kami menjaga bumi dan kita semua menjaga bumi. Terima kasih, Kure Sumangat.
Thank you so much, Ruka. Yes, it's always very inspiring to hear about the youth who have returned home to protect their land, and with leadership such as her, we're going to be good. Next up, we're going to hear about from Tuntiak Katan from the Koika.
Un saludo caluroso desde la Amazonía ecuatoriana. Soy Tuntiak Katan del pueblo Shuar y en esta ocasión quiero invitar a reflexionar sobre los territorios, la biodiversidad, los bosques, el agua que quedan en el mundo. Solo imagínense en este momento por qué existen esos bosques, esa biodiversidad. ¿Ustedes creen que son por la política pública de los gobernantes, de las empresas grandes, o son porque las comunidades indígenas y comunidades locales están preservando por su sistema de vida, por su cosmovivencia, por su forma de vivir y sus conocimientos y sus prácticas? Si vamos en el mundo a ver en diferentes países, Los bosques que quedan son en territorios indígenas, no son en otros lugares. Por lo tanto, ahora mismo las comunidades indígenas se vuelven y se han vuelto en los mejores protectores de la vida, son los mejores guardianes del pasado, del presente y el futuro para las generaciones indígenas y no indígenas. Y ahora es necesario respetar sus derechos, garantizar sus derechos de tierras y territorios, porque cada vez más están siendo amenazados, perseguidos, encarcelados y asesinados, tanto por las empresas transnacionales en complicidad con los gobiernos. Por lo tanto, hago esta reflexión para que contribuyan todo el mundo y garantizar la pervivencia de sus pueblos. No es posible que los gobernantes, las ONGs, los científicos, desde un escritorio, desde una oficina, quieran solucionar las problemáticas de los diferentes territorios, de problemáticas ambientales en diferentes partes del mundo. Más bien, hay que fortalecer esos conocimientos y prácticas de pueblos indígenas en diferentes partes, porque esos conocimientos garantizan la pervivencia, la conservación de la biodiversidad. Asimismo, también ayudan a combatir el cambio climático en el mundo, a cuidar la tierra, nos ayudan a preservar nuestra casa madre, nuestra casa común que es la tierra. Invito a todos los ciudadanos a tomar reflexión y cada uno de ustedes desde su accionar particular pueden contribuir para fortalecer, para ayudar la preservación de estas comunidades en sus territorios. Pueden contribuir para presionar a los gobernantes del mundo para que garanticen los territorios de pueblos indígenas. Saludos a todos e invito a que se sumen a preservar, a cuidar la casa común de todos, que es la tierra, y es la única que tenemos.
Tuntiak Katan, everyone, reminding us how cultural biodiversity and natural biodiversity go hand in hand. Thank you so much. And next we have our speaker, Levi Sucre.
Mi nombre es Levi Sucre Romero, soy Bribri, indígena Bribri de Costa Rica y coordinador de la Alianza Mesoamericana de Pueblos y Bosques. Nosotros como pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales a nivel del mundo hemos estado preocupados por el acecho que tienen los bosques por el mal llamado desarrollo. Desde la Alianza Global Territorial Comunitaria, desde AMAN en Asia, APIP en Brasil, COICA en Sudamérica y la Alianza Mesoamericana de Pueblos y Bosques en Mesoamérica, hemos venido recalcando que los derechos de los pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales en la protección de los bosques es crucial para salvar este planeta del problema de cambio climático. Ahora no solamente del problema de cambio climático, sino también de la acechanza, digamos, de pestes como la pandemia del COVID-19. Estamos bastante preocupados porque en este momento, digamos, los pueblos indígenas estamos más vulnerables. Nuestro enmayado cultural, nuestra forma de vida clánica nos hace mucho más vulnerables a las pandemias como el COVID-19. Esto porque nuestros núcleos familiares son muy extensos y nuestra cultura es muy de mucha convivencia y nos ha costado muchísimo resolver este enfoque cultural para poder protegerse del COVID-19. Esto pone en riesgo a las comunidades locales y pueblos indígenas. Y al estar en riesgo no solamente las vidas de nosotros, también están en riesgo los bosques. ¿Por qué? Porque si desaparecen los mayores y si desaparecemos como pueblos, somos los defensores, los guardianes de estos bosques a nivel del mundo. Y nosotros, sin nosotros que hemos estado luchando en diferentes espacios globales, nacionales, locales, a través de medios de comunicación, de videos, para exigirle a los políticos de los países, especialmente desarrollados, que el modelo de desarrollo de extracción y depredación de los recursos no nos va a llevar a ningún lado, sino más que a la muerte. Estamos preocupados porque esta pandemia en los pueblos indígenas no está bien atendida por los gobiernos. Estamos casi al borde de un genocidio indirecto y por eso estamos aquí llamando a que se le dé más atención a los pueblos, llamando que en momentos que estamos preocupados por nuestra gente defendiéndonos del COVID-19 no se pasen políticas que lesionan nuestros derechos, no estén las empresas tratando de meterse ahora que estamos nosotros defendiendo la salud de nuestra gente. Es un tema bien complicado que estamos viviendo los pueblos indígenas alrededor del mundo, porque ahora no solamente enfrentamos la lucha contra el COVID, sino también estamos enfrentando el acecho de empresas transnacionales que quieren destruir los bosques y extraer los recursos minerales. Otro tema bien importante que nos preocupa desde los pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales de Mesoamérica y también del mundo es que es evidente que el COVID-19 va a dejar a los países sin recursos económicos. Va a haber una recesión económica. Y las políticas de reactivación que están impulsando ya algunos sectores es precisamente arremeter contra los recursos naturales y los bosques. Y eso significa que van a vulnerar nuestros derechos, van a vulnerar nuestras comunidades y van a depredar lo poco que nos queda en este planeta. Por eso hacemos un llamado a la gente, a la comunidad internacional, a los políticos, a la cooperación, volver los ojos hacia las comunidades locales y pueblos indígenas para darnos una mano en esta lucha, no solamente para defendernos del ataque del COVID, sino para este inminente ataque que viene por parte de empresas transnacionales que quieren y están intentando desde ya destruir los bosques y depredar los recursos de la tierra para sus intereses económicos. El modelo de desarrollo que lleva el mundo basado en el extractivismo, en el monocultivo, eso nos va a llevar a la ruina, va a llevar al planeta a un caos. Por eso los pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales estamos levantando la voz, le estamos diciendo al mundo, vuelvan sus ojos a este remanente de personas que estamos conviviendo con los bosques, porque no es un asunto de nosotros, de vida de nosotros, es un asunto de vida de ustedes también y del planeta. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Levi, and thank all of the bugs and the crickets that were echoing his messages from his land in Costa Rica. So these guys are tireless. They are, I often wonder what fuels them, how do they continue, in the face of such drastic adversity as they're facing now. And I think it comes down to relationship. They are not themselves, they are the whole. And the thing about relationship is that you can't measure it, right? You can't put a price tag on relationships. There's just too many feelings in the way involved. And this is very difficult to grasp for a homogenizing culture that is accustomed to commodifying everything, even disasters. It's very difficult to understand. But ultimately, this is the only way to rise out of the flames, to follow the lead of people who are in constant, diverse, and dynamic relationship with living systems, with life itself, right? Because if we ignore this, every other pathway leads to further enslavement and natural destruction, no matter how powerful the machinery or how enormous the profits or how conclusive the data. Indigenous people are of their land. They are family with it. They're in direct relationship with nature in visible and invisible ways. Their systems of understanding are based on many, many more thousands of years of trial and error than our young and fiery model of science. They are based on care and on reciprocity, on things that seem quite foreign to us these days. But even by our reductionist scientific standards, there is clear evidence that Indigenous peoples are the best guardians of our natural world. And they can be our teachers as well if we would only humble ourselves enough to learn, if we would only be willing to face the responsibility of being free in this world, because this requires a big and very, very wonderful shift in our values. And it's good, you know, we all grow from a shift in perspective, and it's due. So I digress. They've asked me to explain, again, their 5 specific demands that they feel need to be met in order to safeguard their role as climate heroes in our struggle for the long-term future of our planet. So number 1, which should really go without saying, stop murdering and criminalizing Indigenous and local community leaders. Number 2, recognize their right to own their land, their territories, and their resources. So give them their land rights. Number 3, ask for their uninfluenced, unmanipulated, prior and informed consent if you want to use their land for any reason. Number 4, finance their projects, their local solutions, their initiatives, finance them directly. I think this is really important because we've taken so much from Indigenous territories. You know, most of the global economy has grown on the backs of the resources that we found on native lands. So finance their projects. This is good reciprocity. And finally, include their ancient knowledge systems, which have been developed in harmony with nature for millennia, into the decision-making structures. And the only way to do that is giving them a seat at the table. So these are all really, really important messages, and this is very basic. So I really hope that you guys, you know, all of you listening out there, take this to heart and figure out ways in which you can support this initiative of protecting the defenders of the planet, of the forests, of nature. So I would like to really thank, if not us, then who, again, for asking the question. If not us, then who? And also the Global Alliance of Territorial Communities, the AMPB, the APIB, COICA, and AMAN for putting all of this together, your efforts and your work, for your dedication, and all the ways in which you inspire all of us to continue growing and learning in this world. And I guess that this is the end of the Nature Hub for Life, the Nature for Life Hub, rather. And with all my heart, I pray that you guys have heard the messages brought to you today and really listened, you know, ahead of this UN Biodiversity Conference. And no doubt that tomorrow there will be many efforts to monetize nature. There'll be pressure to continue the efforts of centralizing control with the excuse of saving lives. And this happens often, you know, when we confuse power and control, because control needs violence. But power grows with support. So I would like to leave you guys with some questions, because that's kind of where I exist these days, in the question. How do you measure the love that you feel for your kids? How do you measure how this love affects their lives? How do you measure the love for your parents and for your pets? Can you put a price tag on that? Or would you be willing to give everything so that they can be free and happy? This love is both the question and the answer. It is more valuable than gold, more powerful than missiles, as complex as our galaxy and as infinite as time itself. This love requires our whole beings to be present and patient and true, or it is not love. This love is the love of life itself. And this love of life is at the root of all Indigenous cultures everywhere. And all of us need to learn from that, to remember this love for nature. So thank you all again, and bless you all. And one final question, right? If not us, then who?
And with that, we close our very last session of the Nature for Life Hub. We are immensely grateful to each and every one of you for joining the discussion and enhancing the call to action. We certainly have our work cut out for us, but we know we are not in this alone. For those who want to keep the discussion going online, please use the hashtag #NatureForLife to continue our forward motion on this global conversation. Thank you so much to our partners for helping making this virtual event a reality. And thank you to all the viewers who joined today. This is just the beginning. We wish you all the best and thank you again. Hasta la próxima.